A child has just opened their eyes for the first time, silent, not a cry, not a whimper. And yet everyone around them is already on their knees. Wrapped in cool, soft linen threaded with the finest flax of the Nile, you lie still blinking at a world that seems to already know who you are. And then from your tiny throat, a single sound escapes. Oh, that's all it takes. Every head in the room lowers to the ground. Let me tell you something. You've just been reborn as a pharaoh. From this moment forward, your life won't just be lived, it will be written. In rituals, in prophecy, in the eyes of 1,000 followers who will never meet your gaze. Now look closely at your room. It's not a nursery. It's a palace of polished stone. The ceiling above you is lined with burnished copper gleaming like fallen stars in candlelight. Already a charm bracelet rests on your wrist, your first amulet, before you've learned how to hold your own hand. Your eyes can barely focus, but somewhere in the shadows a black cat sits silently watching you. Its eyes are gold, its body still, and it hasn't blinked once. This room may be your birthplace, or your tomb. In ancient Egypt, the line between the two was razor thin. From outside, footsteps halt just short of the door. Servants kneel, placing offerings on the ground with both hands. Their foreheads touch the dust, not because they fear you, but because they fear what you represent. You've never spoken a word, never formed a thought, but you're already the center of a universe ruled by gods. Each breath you take isn't filled with oxygen, it's filled with expectation. Pharaohs, they say, are gods made flesh, and gods aren't meant to be loved. They are meant to be worshipped. You don't know your name because your true name has been hidden, sealed, guarded. If it were ever stolen, so would your soul. You've never been held, never been rocked to sleep, because anyone who dares to touch the chosen without sacred cleansing could die. The first room of your life has no wooden cradle, no lullaby, no morning light, just cold granite walls carved with falcon heads and quiet prayers whispered by people who don't dare look at you. You're the only child in the kingdom everyone knows, but no one is allowed to name. Every object around you has been selected with one message in mind. This god does not gamble with fate. Your blanket, infused with lotus oil embroidered with wings and the eye of Ra. Your cradle lined with white calf skin used only once, then burned. And beneath it, a copper plate etched with the symbol of Horus. Just in case your soul gets lost, it will know how to find its way home. Everything has been prepared, recorded, sealed, except you. So there you lie, small, silent, in a world that has already mapped your path centuries before you ever arrived. Most people are born with mystery. You were born with a legend, not yet written, but already waiting. So let me ask you, if your name, your breath, your hands, even the first glance you give to the world, has all been decided before you ever lived, are you still you? Is your soul a gift or a possession? Whatever the answer, remember this. From the moment you opened your eyes, your life ceased to be life. It became a ceremony. You grew up in that palace like a lotus flower sealed in a crystal vase, untouched by mud yet never allowed to feel real water. Each morning you woke not to the sun itself, but to the softest sigh of wind passing through gold-threaded curtains. They didn't block the light, they refracted it, filling your chamber with a honey-glow haze as if you were waking inside a silk-wrapped sun. When your eyes opened, someone was already waiting, a young handmaiden who never once dared look you in the face, gently pressed a dab of lotus oil on your forehead before slipping away without a word, as if she too was part of a ceremony, not a person. Every movement around you was exact, measured, deliberate, but none of it felt real. It was as though the entire world had been designed not to love you, but to preserve you in a state where nothing could rot. You learned to walk without ever touching the ground. Your feet only knew carpets. You learned to breathe without ever hearing another breath because people held theirs when they came close. You learned silence because your first questions were never answered. Truth is, there was no one to ask. The servants didn't speak. The priests looked through you as if you were some holy symbol that didn't require emotions. And your parents. They were never truly present, though statues of them stood everywhere. History tells us that Pharaoh Akhenaten once left his son alone in a room for days, not out of cruelty, but because he believed solitude was the clearest mirror for divinity. Maybe you were the loneliest child to ever live inside a palace of 214 rooms. No one ever shouted at you, but no one ever called your name when you cried. You don't remember who fed you your first meal. only that the lotus porridge came in a silver spoon presented as an offering. The servant knelt, raised the bowl above her head, then backed away as if the food wasn't meant for a child, but for a god born from sand and ancient songs. You were never beaten, but you were never hugged. There were no nannies, only guards. No bedtime stories, just statues of deities stationed silently at your door each night. The only game you ever played was counting how many times the cat licked your feet each afternoon. You always won. But you were the only one playing. Some afternoons stretched on forever. Sunlight danced through layers of carved screens spilled across stone tables and scattered over tiled floors painted with the image of a sun god swallowing stars. You'd sit in your cobalt silk robe, the kind only chosen children wore, and watch the shadows shift across your walls hour by hour. You didn't know what lay outside that door, but you knew every crack in the stone of your own room. You may not remember who first spoke to you in a complete sentence, but you remember the sound of the old priest's footsteps every time he came to check on your spiritual state. He never said a word, just stared, nodded, and left. You began to wonder, was that nod because you were calm today, or because you'd grown as still as a statue? In those early years, your entire world was so tightly controlled, you didn't even need to feel. And that perhaps was the most dangerous thing, because when a child isn't taught to feel, they grow up unable to tell the difference between real love and fear disguised as devotion. Then one afternoon you stepped into a room draped in rose silk where priestesses were rehearsing sacred dances for the goddess Isis. And for the first time in years you asked a question, just a small one: who is my mother? The room fell silent. A single red thread slipped from the hand of a woman mid-dance. And you learned something else. Some questions aren't ignored because they're wrong. They're ignored because no one knows the answer. Maybe the real question is this: if everyone around you has their head bowed, who will teach you how to look up? While other children were learning to share their toys, you were learning how a glance could get someone killed. From the tilt of a shoulder, the rhythm of footsteps across sun-baked tiles, the way a hand brushed a beard, you learned that betrayal never shouted. It whispered like a prayer that never made it to the gods. Your first school had no chalkboards. No one handed out quizzes. Instead, there was a brass mirror placed in the centre of the room, reflecting your face in warped shadows and rolls of papyrus inked with sacred hieroglyphs where a single misread symbol could get you sealed away by the jackal-headed god, Anubis, the gatekeeper of the underworld. In Egypt, getting the lesson wrong didn't mean a bad grade. It meant not being buried with rites. Your teachers never called themselves teachers. They were priests keepers of the soul behind language men who could command the wind during rituals and teach you how to lie convincingly enough to survive a ceremony where one wrong chant meant snakes would slither into your bed that night. Your first lesson wasn't morality. It was encryption. Not be good, and you'll be loved, but be clever, and you'll stay alive. You were taught to choose your prayers carefully, not for their sincerity, but for their safety. A prayer for a sunrise sounded very different than a prayer to curse a rival without offending a god. One misplaced syllable, and the sun god might abandon you forever. Words in your world were weapons, and you, a child who'd never truly smiled, had to learn to turn every phrase into a dagger wrapped in silk. Don't be surprised. Ramses II, one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs, was trained to decode assassination plots hidden in dreams. His mentors weren't just stargazers. They were fearsmiths, masters of using dread to shape the next king. One story tells of a day during the offering to Amun when Ramses abruptly stopped chanting. He had dreamed a god warned him that continuing the ritual would mean death. That day, a priest beside him was caught with a small blade hidden in his sleeve. That's Egypt for you, a land where even your sleep needs guards, where prophecy weighs more than evidence, and where you learn the difference between reverence in the eyes and eyes that quietly hope to see you fall. Have you ever wondered if everyone around you was playing a role? If their smiles were ceremonial? If their bowed heads were just a mask for calculating the distance between your neck and their reach? Have you ever longed to trust someone completely? Maybe you did, until you saw the scarab. It was during a holy offering. You lifted your first incense plate when a small beetle crawled out from the seam of the burner, just a tiny motion, but you noticed. You set the dish down immediately. A soft clang of metal rang through the hall, and at once a servant was seized. Beneath his feet, tucked in the ash, was a dry clump of poison. If that beetle hadn't lost its way, you wouldn't be alive to remember this. In Egypt, the gods didn't need to appear. Sometimes they just sent an insect. And from that moment on, you learned faster than any child your age. You learned to listen to silence, to live like a breeze pretending not to exist, because power doesn't belong to the one who gives orders, it belongs to the one who knows who will betray them before it happens. Are you ready for your next lesson? Welcome to the class titled Ruling with Blood Without Letting the Blood Touch Your Hands. Just after your 16th year, they invited you into a room as cool and still as a stone well buried deep in the desert. No one explained why, but you knew something was about to be chosen for you. On the stone table lay a slate inked in black with names. Not strangers. These were cousins, half-sisters, nieces of those who once nearly seized your father's throne. A priest holding a dry reed stalk tapped each name as he murmured, "Blood must preserve blood. If the blood is thin, the crown will be too." You sat in silence, because really what could you say that wouldn't be wrong? No one asked, "Who do you love?" The only question that mattered was, does she carry the right lineage? In Egypt, love was a luxury reserved for commoners, those not charged with upholding the divine order. But you wouldn't marry for love. You would marry to safeguard the genetic architecture of the cosmos, the way the gods once birthed the sun from each other's mouths. History never hid this. Tutankhamun, the most famous pharaoh of all time, married his own sister. Both their children died in the womb. Their tiny twisted bodies were discovered in King Tut's tomb, wrapped in gold, yet disfigured, one with a skull deformity, the other with undeveloped lungs. Modern science confirmed what ancient whispers had long known. Incest destroyed a dynasty before it ever saw daylight. You learned this not in class, but from brittle papyrus scrolls hidden behind the statue of Sekhmet. No one questioned the system, because if you didn't marry your blood, your enemies would marry theirs into you, and the throne would bleed into another line. The choice wasn't who to marry. It was how softly you'd die. You picked a girl. You barely remember her name, only that she bore the same divine birthmark, was born under the same eclipse, and raised on the same lotus nectar mixed with white camel milk. The wedding took place on a day so gentle it felt like death had never happened. Harps played like wind brushing ceramic jars. The wedding veil was a strip of crimson silk embroidered with the eyes of Ra looking backward. You smiled a ceremonial smile, lips curled without teeth. The bride bowed, not clearly from emotion, perhaps just trained to. Her hand touched yours, cold as bronze that had forgotten fire. You squeezed back, not out of love, but because they'd told you everyone is watching right now. The celebration continued under the soft clink of bronze platters and the scratch of prayer stones being placed on the altar. You saw no real smiles, just painted ones like rouge on a death mask. Some guests even sketched fake smiles on their faces with charcoal cheaper than feeling something. A priest leaned close and whispered, "You've done the right thing. The gods smile upon your union." You nodded. But somewhere in the back of your mind, a question echoed from the bottom of some long-forgotten well. If your heart is never allowed to choose love, who will keep it beating? You wondered if that was why so many pharaohs died in splendor, yet with their eyes wide open. Not because they were murdered, but because they never truly lived. No blade had to find their backs. Their hearts simply froze over. That night you and your fated wife lay together on a bed embroidered with inverted lotus blooms. No words were spoken, just the sound of a cat crying in the courtyard, and the wind slipping through the curtains carrying a lotus petal already wilted long before the wedding ever began. People often think the greatest fear for a pharaoh is assassination. But no, the true fear lies in something far smaller. A scratch, right on the pinky toe, on a day too quiet to be trusted. You don't quite remember when it happened. Maybe it was while descending the slick stone steps at the altar of Sobek, where Nile water still soaked the floor after morning rites. Or perhaps during a ritual dance when a shard of bronze broke from an incense burner and grazed your skin through the sheer ceremonial cloth. Just a cut, as small as a fingernail. It barely bled. But days later, the skin around it began to darken, then swell. And then your heartbeat changed, stuttering out of rhythm like a drumline gone astray during the funeral rites of the wrongly slain. Ironically, this was Egypt, the cradle of early medicine. They said if you lived in Thebes, you could be treated by those who wrote entire books about the human body more than 3,500 years ago. They had the Ebers Papyrus, a 20-metre scroll filled with nearly 700 prescriptions from honey and mint mixtures for sore throats to instructions for cleansing wounds with clay and copper salts. Even the art of pulse reading was described as listening to the river within to see if it flows true or strays. You were cared for by the best. Some claimed to be disciples of Imhotep, the genius who built the step pyramid at Saqqara, and who was worshipped as the first god of medicine. Egyptians revered him as the one who speaks with the organs. You remember clearly how they laid you down in a cold stone chamber, where sunlight squeezed in through a single slit in the wall. They smeared honey onto your wound, whispered prayers to Isis, and massaged the salve gently as though calming a rebellious soul rather than a swollen toe. An elderly woman with braided hair, messy but meticulous, examined the inflammation and shook her head. They said she had trained at the Temple of Se, where Pesishe, the world's first recorded female physician, once practiced. Pesishe lived around 2400 BCE, known as Overseer of the Lady Physicians, and her name still carried weight across Lower Egypt. You, a pharaoh considered a living god, found yourself praying not to die from poor hygiene. Perhaps in a civilization capable of raising pyramids, the deepest shame wasn't dying in war or by dagger, but being defeated by a bacterium. No one said it aloud, but you saw it in their silence, the slight tremble behind their eyes. No one dared touch your foot anymore. Servants applied oils with a spoon carved from horn. Every object that met your skin was burned immediately, not for ceremony, but out of fear. One night you dreamed you were on the death bark crossing the river. The ferryman was a physician in a white robe. He said nothing, just stared, his eyes clouded with the weight of knowing that sometimes even all the knowledge in the world can't outrow fate once it has chosen its direction. The next morning your fever peaked. You thrashed in delirium. You shattered a bowl of scented oil. The sound of it breaking in that still room rang out like the world itself had cracked. You didn't die. By youth or luck, or perhaps the wisdom of a healer who knew just which herb to pick in just the right season, you survived. No one could say for sure, and by then you no longer cared to ask, but after that day you never stepped barefoot onto temple stone again. You began refusing anything that could slip from your grasp: ritual knives, ceremonial axes, even drinking vessels carved from volcanic glass. You learned death doesn't need trumpets or traitors. Sometimes it arrives dressed in silk, hidden beneath a royal robe, silent and unseen. And then one day, when you stood upright for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, sunlight filtered through a curtain embroidered with scarabs, the symbol of rebirth, and something shimmered as it fell from the ceiling. A dried mint leaf, perhaps carried by the wind, perhaps something else. You picked it up, placed it in your palm, and exhaled slowly. A chill spread over your skin, cool, weightless, like a veil lifting. And in that moment you wondered, in a civilization that can embalm flesh for 1,000 years, is it possible that the hardest thing of all is keeping a soul alive? You were still young, but your heart had already survived a war no one witnessed. And from that day forward you began making decisions not with belief but with fear. See you again, at the throne, where every decree you sign will be etched in gold, but often even your own hands won't remember why. There's something you come to realize not long after the first day you wear the white and red crowns, uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. The throne never truly sits still. It isn't built for you to remain on it forever. It exists to test whether you can endure the loneliness, the doubt, and the reverence. A reverence that often feels more like a sweet trap than a gift. The coronation is over. The chants of "Long live the Pharaoh" have faded. Karnak Temple has returned to the low, steady beat of everyday rituals. And in those everyday days you begin to learn that ruling is nothing like what the boy you once were imagined sitting alone in polished halls dreaming of command. Because the moment you say the words "I command," you're no longer a person. You're a target. In ancient Egypt, a pharaoh wasn't merely chosen to rule. He had to prove every single day that he deserved to still be alive. Every decree you issue, whether crushing a rebellion in Nubia or selecting the stone for a divine stele, is a blade with 2 edges. If you choose well, people will say it was the gods' will. If you choose wrong, they'll quietly conclude the gods have withdrawn from you, and the gods never say so out loud. That's why a pharaoh's fall rarely begins with betrayal. It begins with silence. You might still be seated on the throne, but the ones who truly decide how long you'll stay aren't the gods. They're the quietest people in the palace. The high priests who read omens, the astronomers who chart fate into the stars, the generals who know just how much grain has gone missing at the frontier, and the women in the back of the harem, their wigs flawless, their silence sharper than daggers. People tell the story of Thutmose III, brilliant conqueror later hailed as the Napoleon of Egypt. But few recall the 20 years he lived in the shadow of his stepmother Hatshepsut, who proclaimed herself Pharaoh, donned a false beard, ruled as a man, built temples and expanded trade routes all the way to Punt, engraving her name into stone more deeply than most kings. Thutmose, the rightful heir, could only stand by and wait. Wait for her to die, to falter, or to be forsaken by the gods. Not everyone born to be king gets to rule when it matters. Now you are the one ruling, and yet your heart is constantly guarded. The stone statues you once trusted now feel like cold, unblinking eyes. You enter council chambers and everyone bows, yet no one dares raise their head. You give orders, they obey, but no one asks a question, and that is what makes your skin prickle. Every time you issue a decree, part of you wonders, is someone out there recording every word, waiting for the day they'll use them to prove your madness? The throne may be a place of offerings, but the eyes turned toward you do not worship. They calculate. Beneath the silk cushion of your seat, it is said, lies a hollow space filled with ashes, remnants from the symbols of pharaohs who were deposed. Not as a curse, as a reminder. No one remains immortal on a throne. Then come the signs, small ones. A ritual drumming ceremony to honour Osiris off by a single beat. No one else notices, but you do. A deviation of one beat you were once taught signals infiltration. 2 beats uprising. You remain still, nod as if all is well, but your fingers tighten around the sceptre, not to command but to defend. You remember what your old tutor said. The one everyone kneels before is often the one easiest to stab in the back. Back then you thought it was just a metaphor. Now you pray. You didn't understand it too late. No matter how exalted, the throne is still just a chair, an object. It doesn't speak. It doesn't remember. It makes no promises. The world only sees its golden shimmer. Only you, the one seated, can feel the icy core of its timber frame. Once you believed your coronation marked the end of your journey to become a living god. But now you know. That was just the warm-up, and in the end you must ask yourself, what if the throne isn't a prize for the strong, but a gleaming cage built to trap the souls of those who were once chosen? Once you've survived the politics, the glances laced with doubt, the drum beats out of rhythm beneath your throne, you begin to see something unsettling. The real enemy doesn't always sit inside the palace. Sometimes it lives in the water, or coils silently in the shadows where light never reaches. One afternoon you're resting by the western lotus pond, the one built with tiered stones, to let the Nile flood gently over during its season. A handmaiden approaches, leans in and whispers, "Your Majesty." This morning a white crocodile surfaced by the lowest step. The priests say it's a sign from Sobek, or a sign of blood. You set down your barley water and glance toward the murky surface. Nothing. Still you don't bathe that day. In Egypt, crocodiles are not just beasts. They're divine, and they are perfect assassins. You remember what happened to Pharaoh Meremtar, the one who once stood victorious against the Sea Peoples. Months after his triumph he was dead. His mummified remains bore small bite marks on his thigh, on his wrist. A modern scholar examining the wounds said it might have been a crocodile, or a message, a warning, from whom no one knows. But the war had ended, death had not. You start noticing the little things, a missing anklet from a court dancer, a clump of unfamiliar soil beneath the ceremonial pillow, a faint flute at midnight coming not from a temple rite, but from the rear garden where no one is allowed after dusk. You ask the guards. "Perhaps the wind, Your Majesty," they reply. You say nothing, because in Egypt even the wind knows how to carry poison. The cobra venerated as sacred mounted atop the pharaoh's crown, as a symbol of divine power, is also the deadliest tool in the harem. They're hidden inside jewellery boxes beneath prayer rugs, or most terrifying of all, sealed within ritual chests marked for the king's hands only. There's a story a pharaoh once died just hours after receiving a wedding gift from his new bride. Inside the box, a scroll of blessings, 2 sacred coins, and a serpent. Small black, no thicker than a thread, sleeping beneath a sheet of silk. It needed only 1 bite. No one heard him scream, because a living god must never cry out. Now you begin to doubt everything. And just as suspicion begins to feel like safety, a servant leans in again and whispers, "Seth, visited my dreams this morning. Be careful, my king." You smile, not with relief, but with dread. Because you know now even someone else's dream could be used to kill you. From the pond you retreat to your chambers. From your chambers you retreat deeper into your sanctuary. But soon you realize some threats can't be shut out. because this time the enemy does not swim beneath the surface, it doesn't whisper from the shadows, it flows in your blood. There's a cruel paradox only pharaohs know: to preserve the divine lineage you must marry your own blood. But that very practice slowly drains the vitality from your veins, like crops reaped from the same exhausted soil for too many seasons. Modern scientists examined the DNA of Tutankhamun, Egypt's youngest pharaoh, and found bone deformities, a fractured leg that never healed autoimmune disorders, all traced back to generations of inbreeding. You think about yourself, how your fingers tremble slightly in the cold, how your right knee sometimes aches for no reason. The physicians rub sacred oils, the priests chant reassurance. But you know, this illness doesn't come from outside. It's been in your bones all along. A wound on your skin you can heal with honey. A traitor in your palace, you can have them executed. But if the blood itself is rotting you from within, what then? Maybe you don't need to write a will, because sometimes the air already has. And now, as the sun dips low, you sit alone in your limestone bath chamber. The water has long since drained. Your palms still hold the gritty residue of salt. You're not listening for music anymore. You're listening for something else, a faint shuffle like scales brushing stone. No one dares enter. No one knocks. And you ask yourself if the throne is just a seat surrounded by 1,000 claws. Do you still want to sit on it? We have not yet reached the end, because you are still alive, at least for tonight. But tomorrow may be the day you realize death doesn't always need claws or fangs. Sometimes, all it takes is a pair of eyes that know too much. 30 years! That's how long you've worn the crown with the cobra on your forehead heavier with each passing day. 30 years on the throne, the softest seat in all of Egypt yet, the one that finally bent your back beyond repair. Truly. You once believed gods don't get tired, but now every morning your knees crack like granary doors opening. Every time you bow in ceremony, your spine lets out a sound like an old bamboo fan folding shut. A young priest once exclaimed, "Your Majesty, your eyes are now as deep as the desert." You smiled. Not because it pleased you, but because you understood it was a polite way of saying your vision had grown dim. There was a time you commanded with a glance, a hand gesture, a mere tilt of the head, and the army would change direction. Now, you must repeat yourself 3 times slowly, because your advisors want to make sure they heard you correctly. You know what they mean. They're checking if you remember what you just said. And the strange part is you're still alive. So many who plotted your downfall are now fertilizer for the lotus gardens. The schemes, the whispers, the eyes, sharp as daggers, you survived them all. But what you couldn't outlast was the dull ache in your back and the sleepless nights that followed. Each time you wear the crown, the headaches return. Not from the weight of power, but the actual weight. Whoever designed that thing clearly never had to wear it for 6-hour ceremonies. You once joked even gods get gout. They're just better at hiding it. One quiet afternoon, as golden sunlight poured sideways across the limestone corridor, you sat alone in the old judgment hall once used to sentence traitors. Now it held only you and the whisper of wind through the drapes. You raised your hand, the hand that once commanded the desert. A single flick could summon trial or death. Now that hand trembles not from fear but from age. You ask the priest beside you, "Do you believe I'm a god?" He bows, deeply, but says nothing. It's a question you've asked yourself many times. Some days you truly believed it. Other days you laughed because you'd played this role so long, you forgot where the mask ended and the skin began. You used to imagine death would come like thunder. An assassination, a revolt, a grand mistake. But no. Real death arrives like an old friend who's been sitting beside you all along. Silent. Waiting. Waiting for you to walk slower, think harder, forget just one more name, then tap your shoulder gently as if to ask, "Have you lived enough?" They once told you gods do not fear death. They live forever in the hearts of the people, but hearts change, and even gods grow weary. You look at the carving of yourself on the temple wall, crown raised high, scepter in hand, immortal, regal. Then you look at yourself now, feet wrapped in cloth hair, dusted with salt, breathing out like mist on stone. The two look the same in form, but one is stone, the other human. And then a question rises not as a thunderclap, but as a final breath slipping free who embalms a god. When no one believes in gods anymore, you don't answer, because perhaps that answer isn't meant for the living. It's meant for the one who comes next, the one peeking through the golden curtain, fingers brushing the scepter. And so, as the last light of that day falls across your hand, the same hand that once inscribed history, you gaze at it. Not with regret, but with remembrance. Every god was once a man. The only difference is, gods are not allowed to forget they were human. Not all rituals wait for death to begin. Some begin the moment your soul starts drifting slower than your breath. You no longer hear people calling you your majesty, but you still hear the salt falling grain by grain like tiny hailstones tapping against skin not yet hardened. And in the faint light of the oil lamp you see the ones gathered around you, not looking at you as someone about to leave, but as a symbol yet to be completed. Completed doesn't mean understood. Your body, as the rite demands, is taken to the embalming room, its walls inscribed with verses from the Book of the Dead. There a small golden blade is used to open your chest, each organ carefully removed as if disassembling a sacred relic no one dares to scratch. They leave your heart, because to the Egyptians the heart is where memory and wisdom reside. It will be weighed on Ma'at's scale, balanced against a single feather, to judge whether you are worthy of entering eternity. But you're not thinking about the afterlife. Not now, because at this moment, you're still here. There's a story never etched into stone, only whispered among embalmers, of a time they unwrapped a mummy over 3,000 years old, and the middle finger was curled, not from decay, but as if someone had once tried to knock from the inside. No one speaks of such things during royal funerals, neither do you. But deep down you know the fear isn't of death. The fear is being trapped inside your body while everyone believes you've already gone. They wash you with date wine, soak the linen strips in sandalwood oil, wrap you tight layer by layer, as if to bind not just your power, but your fears, and all the things you never got to say. The embalmer leans down and whispers a phrase in the ancient tongue, a language that only lives now in prayer. You hear it, and understand, though your mouth does not open. You learned that tongue at 13 during Imkat's spirit ceremony. Back then you thought it was simply the voice of the ancestors. Now you understand it's the voice for those still present but no longer able to speak. Outside, the offering procession continues, tray after tray of gold, crystal cups, amulets, incense, even the short bow you once used in your first hunt, all placed into your tomb. No one asks if you need them, because to them you've become silence. But you don't think so. You still hear footsteps, strings humming softly, fabric brushing against stone, and above all, the sound of an offering slipping from a servant's hand. It falls the moment they seal your coffin. That sound, the last one to reach your ears, is cold, sharp, and alone. You lie still, motionless. But your mind erases through every carved line on the wall, each symbol etched in blood, in hope, in promises no one could keep. You want to ask, do I truly deserve to enter eternity? Or am I being locked away simply so no one sees how tired I've become? And then a question thunders, not aloud but deep within. What if the curse was never in the stone, but in the one who listens, not in the forbidden words, but in the ones left unfinished, uncarved, unspoken, untouched, yet still present like a breath that hasn't exhaled? You don't know where you'll go from here, but right now you still hear, and if you can hear me telling this, maybe you haven't fully left this world yet. You wake up in the familiar darkness of your modern room, everything shaped by logic, a smart lamp set to shut off in 20 minutes, the whisper of an air conditioner humming like a lullaby written in binary. Everything fits the century, and yet something doesn't. Something barely there, like a trace of sand still clinging to your heel, a faint scent of mint on your wrist though you wore no oil, an image in your mind that feels implanted as if carved into you long before you were born. You've seen it before, a flickering oil lamp in a stone chamber, towering pillars etched with the goddess Bastet, a bronze tray to the left of your hand, and someone faceless bowing low before you. You once thought it was just a dream, but after everything you've heard, felt, experienced on this journey, why does every detail match so uncannily? The ancient Egyptians believed some memories do not belong to you, yet they live inside you, because not every soul chooses to leave. Some simply change where they dwell. And if this story of Crown's betrayals and a slumber turned to stone feels strangely familiar to you, perhaps it's not because you listen so well. Perhaps it's because you're remembering something already within you. The curse, if it exists, isn't divine punishment for tomb robbers. It is the echo of a life left unfinished, a script written in blood and limestone that someone is waiting for you to complete. They thought sealing the final coffin lid would end it all, but they didn't know. What lingers longest is not the mummy. It's the memory as persistent as desert sand. You may be sitting in your living room, phone in hand, mind full of rational thought, yet a quiet question still rises from deep in your subconscious. Are you sure you ever left the palace? Or are you still walking its golden halls step by step in a world where everyone bows and only you remember who you once were? If you can still hear me, if your breath has slowed while reading these last words, then maybe the curse hasn't ended, or rather, it's only just begun, and the only one who can unlock it is you.